So a group of prominent trade unions and economists gathered to hold a press conference about the current foreign exchange crisis Sri Lanka is facing. And for the past few months, we have been informing the public and the central bank and the authorities about the foreign exchange loss the country has suffered for the period of at least last 15 to 20 years. And there's a statement put out by a prominent group of world-renowned economists, including professors from other disciplines and activists also, stating that Sri Lanka has lost more foreign exchange, or there's an outflow of foreign exchange through trade misinvoicing and transfer pricing, primarily planned and implemented by the business elite in the import and export sector with the blessings of the political establishment. That this amount is far greater than Sri Lanka's total foreign debt combined, both in the private and the public sector. So this is a massive finding and massive eye-opener for both the public and the ruling classes to address this crisis. And they are suggesting that instead of subjecting the economy to these brutal policies where people's welfare has been cut to the rock bottom, and where their real buying power has almost vanished, instead of subjecting the economy to these brutal policies, that the government should address this issue of capital outflows and find ways and means to repatriate it and upgrade the legal system to avoid that from happening. But of course, we see the government has no interest in doing this, despite the fact that the Justice Minister Vijayadasa Rajapaksa had informed the Parliament on the 6th of December that 53 billion has been stashed out or dragged out of the economy for the past 12 years. And so we demand from the government that they set up a parliamentary select committee to investigate this matter and bring the perpetrators to the justice and formulate ways to repatriate this foreign exchange loss. Apart from this, now we know that the government is planning to privatize state institutions as a means of boosting the foreign reserves. So they are expecting something like $3 billion by selling off state assets. And we would like to bring to your notice that the amount that we have lost through trade misinvoicing and transfer pricing, this illicit outflow of money is far greater than this amount, which has been also the idea has been endorsed by these renowned economists across the world, like Professor Ha-Joon Chang, Professor Jomo Sundaram, Professor Danny Roderick from University of Harvard. Many eminent personalities in the world in world economics right now have endorsed this idea, and that they have pressed the government to take measures and action to basically repatriate these funds and stop it from happening. So then the other point that we would like to highlight is the fact that through these draconian tax policy which the 2023 budget has introduced into the economy, they are expecting roughly 2% increase in tax revenue as a percentage of GDP. But we can highlight the fact that since the mid-1990s, the collapse of tax revenue of Sri Lanka as a percentage of GDP was to the tune of about 3 times of the rate that we have recorded now. For instance, the tax revenue was around 22 to 24% of the GDP in the mid-1990s, and now it has collapsed almost below 9%. And now by implementing these tax policies, which the economists have pointed out, which are unrealistic, the estimates are unrealistic, that they are not even able to, they would not be able to gain that much of tax revenue despite subjecting the economy towards these high tax rates, that they are only expecting a 2 percentage point increase in the tax revenue as a percentage of GDP. So what we need to highlight here is the fact that this tremendous outflow of foreign exchange since the BOI was established, giving tremendous tax breaks and tax relief for these BOI firms, which they pay zero taxes for their inputs, have actually enabled or created the legal infrastructure and the economic infrastructure needed for this type of over-invoicing and under-invoicing to take place, and through that method to drag foreign exchange out of the country. So they are demanding the government that they address this issue, because they will be gaining about only 2% of the 2% increase in the tax revenue, where we have lost 3 times more during the past 25 years as a result of these processes. And thirdly, we would like to highlight the demand to cancel debt by considering this foreign debt as odious debt. The argument behind that is that the foreign exchange that is borrowed by the government is borrowed for the welfare of the society and the broader public. But of course, we can see that the money has not been utilized to fulfill that purpose. So for instance, there is a study done in the sub-Saharan African region collecting data from 33 economies. The study basically highlights the fact that because of this outflow of foreign exchange through misinvoicing and transfer pricing, roughly 60% of the debt that they have borrowed, those countries have borrowed, have basically flown out of the countries, and they were not reinvested in the country, but the country, the public and the government is obliged to pay the full 100% of the debt that they have borrowed. So considering the fact that this money has not been responsibly utilized for the benefit of the public, they through the United Nations, these African nations demand that this debt should be considered odious debt, and that should be immediately cancelled. And the legal framework in the international law and also the US domestic law completely facilitates this type of a measure. So we also demand that the government also follow that path, and through an international arbiter like the United Nations should proclaim that this is odious debt, and that the demand should be to cancel that debt. Yes. So apart from that, we also like to highlight the responses of the exporters to all these allegations. So these so-called eminent personalities in the business elite, like Mr. Rohan Masakorala, who has served in so many sectors in this country as the leader of the business elite. Right now he is the Director General of the Sri Lanka Rubber Manufacturers and Exporters Union. Earlier he was the Chairman of the JAAF, Joint Apparel Association Federation, and he is also an eminent personality when it comes to the logistics and shipping sector. So when these allegations were leveled against them, his response was that what is the issue if the businesses have actually dragged the money out within the legal framework of this country? So we would like to pose the question, what is the legal framework which enables you to basically stash out the foreign exchange through misinvoicing and transfer pricing? And we are really happy that even the business elite in the country have accepted this. And lastly, I would also like to point out the distortion of facts by the JAAF and the Tea Exporters Association, claiming that they have not engaged in illegal non-repatriation of their residual income or the value addition as claimed earlier by the central bank. So especially the tea sector is saying their expenditure is 75% of their revenue, which is a complete distortion of the truth of facts, because we know that they have not increased the wages of the workers, and the wages have stagnated for the last so many years. So estate workers' wages constitute about 70 to 80% of their unit production cost. The rest of the inputs, even if the cost of those are doubled, the total production cost would move up around 20 to 30%, whereas the weighted export price which the exporters receive has shot up 116% from December 2021 to October last year, according to the data we have. So this has resulted in the revenue being the unit revenue which the exporters collect being as much as 3 times the unit cost of production. So their profit margins are over 200%, which resulted in an unprecedented boom in the stock market in plantation stocks. So we demand the fact that they should raise the export sector wages in line with the depreciation of the currency, which would also result in a greater inflow of foreign exchange to the country. So we are suggesting this as a solution to this crisis also. One way of solving this is raising the export sector wages in line with the rate of depreciation, because lastly, I would like to also highlight our initial demand that the government, taking all these into account, should set up a parliamentary select committee to investigate these frauds that have been happening throughout the last 3 to 2.5 decades in the country.